massive multiplayer online games have now existed since the 90s in Meridian 59 and EverQuest, through the early 2000s in Star Wars Galaxies and WoW, and through the era of WoW clones and WoW killers. All of this leading to now, 2019. Throughout this explosive growth and yet still such a budding industry, MMO business models have shifted considerably in ways. In an attempt to keep you guys up to date with how each business model worked and currently works, I have concocted this video. In the world of MMOs, there are three main business models to rule them all. I will start with a brief overview of them before diving deeper into each's pros and cons and finally giving my advice on them. The subscription business model, which has existed since the beginning of MMORPGs, being the business model of the first MMORPG ever, Meridian 59, and the majority of the subsequent MMORPGs. The subscription model functions quite simply. You pay a set fee on a monthly basis, usually in the $10 to $15 range, for the promise of constant updates and live development. The monthly cost is off the top of the initial cost of buying the game as well, but oftentimes includes a free month of service. The buy-to-play business model is up next, and is a more recent successful business model to hit the MMO industry. Buy-to-play does have some early MMOs such as Guild Wars 1 and Global Agenda, though the more recent ones include Titan MMORPGs like Elder Scrolls Online, Black Desert Online, and Guild Wars 2. Buy-to-play MMOs cost a box price to play the game, and buy-to-play MMOs also very often feature a cash shop or a premium membership. Free-to-play is the last business model we will cover in this video, and it is probably the most nuanced and most bewildering of them all. Hailing primarily from the Asian region, of Korea in particular, and being made famous by games such as MapleStory, Mabinogi, RuneScape, and more recent titles such as Lord of the Rings Online, Star Trek Online, and Star Wars: The Old Republic. Free-to-play is a business model like the name implies that centers around being free-to-play. Free-to-play means that you can download the game, and it is free to do such and play the game. However, free-to-play games still do make money. Free-to-play MMOs often make money by restricting certain convenience factors, offering purchasable cosmetics, or even slowing the XP gain of players. This is either done through premium memberships, much like the subscription model, or through the cash shop microtransactions. In the most egregious cases, free-to-play can become a case of pay-to-win, and that's also a concept we will cover in the free-to-play section. Before I dive into the first business model on the list, I want to point out that it's very common for an MMO to launch with a certain business model and then change the business model post-launch. This was especially common with subscription-based MMOs that turned free-to-play between 2005 and 2014. Very oftentimes MMOs combined all three business models together, some even going as far to have loot boxes, or basically gambling. MMOs are very complex, and that's why I create often 40-minute videos detailing their rise and falls and reasons for such. Business models certainly can be a contributing factor in such, and in the case of some MMOs, a large reason for the failure of a game. That being said, it's difficult to say that a business model itself is the primary reason for a given MMO failing. So although I will be pointing out some pros and cons of these different models, the model itself is less of a problem. More so, it's how the model is used. A monetization model isn't inherently bad, but because other MMOs have been successful in all three of these business model categories, it's more so that the models themselves can be used poorly or against the interest of the consumer, like a pay-to-win game. So let's talk about the three main business models in the MMORPG market, starting first with the subscription model. The subscription-based model is the oldest of the three main business models, stemming from the first MMO ever, Meridian 59, developed by Archetype Interactive back in '96. The largest MMOs ever in terms of both population and overall sales and profit all share the subscription business model. Lineage won the most successful MMO in terms of revenue generated, nearly $2 billion, steady player base, and longevity, having existed for 15 plus years as a sub-based MMO. Of course, the more popular Western market MMOs to use the subscription model are of course the industry titan World of Warcraft and its pioneer MMO EverQuest. The subscription business model has a long-standing history amongst MMO royalty. It's both the oldest and simplest in design of the business models. The originations of the idea of paying a monthly fee is not a surprise to many who have existed on the internet for a time. With the old-school dial-up internet services such as AOL charging monthly fees for internet access, it was sort of normal place for a software business to charge for continued use of their product since, well, February 1991. With MMORPGs, it's a natural fit due to the infrastructure of the games in the genre. An always online, persistent world present in a game offers a number of unique challenges, such as constant need for updates and bug fixes, especially when content is primarily designed to be consumed and then forgotten. The subscription business model is a promise from the developer that as long as you continue to pay your monthly fee, we have a promise of more content and iterative fixes on the way. This is where the model suffers the majority of the pushback, however. If the developers of an MMO can't keep up with the content demands, or fix the balancing or bugs in their game, it can lead to a loss of their player base. Currently, as of 2019, sub-based MMOs only exist in the pure form in WoW or Final Fantasy XIV. Two very popular MMOs, two of the most popular, but two amongst a sea of other MMOs. So let's talk about the pros of the subscription business model. It covers the added expenses incurred due to the very nature of what an MMO is, and requires to be made and maintained, both in terms of the multiplayer aspects and consistently pushing out new content. The price to entry is quite transparent. It costs a box price, and then a monthly fee that doesn't change. Besides things like server transfers or name changes, you can't go over your $15 monthly ceiling as a consumer. When a sub-based MMO has momentum, it can reach heights we've never seen in the other two models yet. Lineage and WoW are prime examples of the heights a sub-based MMO can reach. When the subscription model works, it works with flying colors. You can afford to continue to put out the level of quality content you need to satisfy your audience. Now, some of the cons of the subscription model are asking the customer to buy the game and continue to pay a monthly fee is a tough ask. It requires a certain level of trust from the player. If the content doesn't keep players coming back, they're just gonna leave. There is a much higher standard here due to the consistent cost. Being the most popular model early on means it's also the model that many failed MMOs adopted. There's a negative stigma surrounding the model, as developers and publishers have been mostly unable to satisfy the constant content churn. Due to the nature of the business model, more episodic content was created in the forms of expansions on top of content updates. The problem is you often have to pay a box price and then maybe more for an expansion that later comes out. So you have to pay yet more money for more content on top of paying monthly, which is supposed to also promise new content. When a subscription MMO starts to bleed population, as most MMOs often do, it suffers an even greater blow due to the fact that an MMO requires a certain amount of players to function. The subscription-based model more so, because their content model is based on their customers consistently paying them $15 a month. If they don't have enough players, they don't have enough money. When a subscription-based MMO warrants the monthly fee, it makes for a magical combination of both player and developer. The developer has a promise in a sense from a player that will play for 30 days or more, as sub fees are usually incremented in that way, and the players have a promise from the developer that they will continue to make such content. When the MMORPG doesn't warrant the $15 a month, well, that's sort of what my Death of a Game series is all about. My advice on picking a game with a subscription fee is to take into consideration how much content the game has out and currently playable. In the case of most games or just entertainment services that utilize a subscription business model, as long as you think that the time spent and enjoyment gained from playing that is worth that monthly fee, then you shouldn't feel guilty about the $15 or whatever the price is. But considering there is only two major popular subscription-based MMOs at the moment, that won't usually be your concern as they have plenty of content. The problem arises when you see the submodel more so sprinkled into the other two business models. That's where it gets tricky. If a game wants you to believe that it's free to play, but it seems like it's pigeonholing you into paying a subscription, say for example in games like Lord of the Rings Online and Star Wars The Old Republic, it might be only worth doing that if you want to complete the story content as soon as possible, as it often makes the game way more convenient to play and level through. Buy-to-play MMOs are certainly less common when compared to the other two business models, especially in an age where free-to-play MMOs are quite dominant. The buy-to-play business model originally served as a halfway point between the subscription title and a free-to-play title. You still spent the money for the box price, with the idea or promise that future expansions will be released, which also need to be purchased if you wanted to experience that content, instead of paying some sort of monthly fee. The earliest example of the buy-to-play business model that I can think of is probably Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1 launched in 2005 globally ultimately, although heavily influenced by their Korean publisher, NCSoft, who saw an opportunity to take a fledgling MMO, and instead of relying on the business model of they thought perhaps in a new market it was time to try something new. Guild Wars 1 cost a box price, but no monthly fees. There wasn't a cash shop either. You bought exactly what you played. Well, at least that's how the model started. It wasn't much longer after that games would adopt a buy-to-play business model up front, but then offer bonuses for subscribed members or even a cash shop that allowed for purchasing of cosmetics or other convenience items. At the core, the buy-to-play model is quite simple, as it's the way most single-player games function. Where it gets more complicated is when you combine aspects from the other two business models. Guild Wars 2, a prominent current MMORPG stemming from the previously mentioned predecessor title, Guild Wars 1, is another buy-to-play title that has a cash shop and charges for its expansions. It is now quite normal for buy-to-play games to also have a subscription of sorts, like I mentioned previously, and a cash shop. At least in the case of Elder Scrolls Online and Black Desert Online, these MMOs not only reap in the benefits of costing a box price, but also boasting robust cash shops and even things like loot boxes and XP bonuses borrowed from the free-to-play business model, as we will later discuss. For now, let's talk about the pros and cons of the buy-to-play business model. Pros. At the origination of the idea, the business model was quite simple. It was how most games functioned, and it was quite transparent. With no monthly fee, theoretically you can buy the game and not have to worry about constant monthly charges. There is less of a timer on content, since buy-to-play players don't have the same content expectations as a subscription player would. When done well, the content-to-price ratio is quite positive. Guild Wars 1 for $40 back then was worth every penny and then some. Now the cons of the buy-to-play business model is, once the idea has been around for some time, it's sort of become a more egregious microtransaction-filled business model than even the free-to-play business model. You charge a price for the game, you charge a price for a bonus subscription of sorts, have a cash shop with convenience and cosmetic items, and finally, also the ability to sell expansions at full price. Buy-to-play at the surface can be simple, but at its core it can have an even higher price tag than the other two business models. Buy-to-play is the melting pot of business models in the MMO realm. Asking for a price up front to buy and play the game, and still expecting a monthly upkeep of sorts, makes communicating as a buy-to-play game seem a bit disingenuous. A game with all three business models seems more like a subscription-based MMO with a cash shop, which is a different connotation. Sell you on the game being buy-to-play like in Black Desert Online's case, but the cash shop still has a strong influence on the game, meaning whether or not you want to spend money on the cash shop, someone is, and they're taking advantage of it. At first glance and in its earlier renditions, the buy-to-play business model was quite attractive for the consumer. For the publisher or developer looking to turn a profit, however, not as attractive. A big issue of the buy-to-play business model is that it ends up becoming a free-to-play business model that also charges a box price, at least in most cases when used. That's because it trends towards more profit. Simply buying a box price and being done with it isn't really a business model designed for a massive multiplayer online game. An MMO incurs constant monthly cost, whether through new content, server infrastructure, or bug fixing and balancing. While I don't want to seem like I'm defending the games who use every monetization strategy imaginable as buy-to-play games, in the case of games like Guild Wars 2 who don't have egregious cash shops and a pretty fair business model, well, that game isn't doing as well as its other free-to-play teammates. With the rise of the mobile market, buy-to-play games look less and less appealing, especially the fair ones like Guild Wars 2, when the free-to-play model just generates more and more income. My advice on the buy-to-play business model is, if you aren't willing to play a game that has a cash shop that could be leveraged by other richer players, and richer as in real-life dollars, the whales so to say, then be careful which buy-to-play game you get involved with. At the end of the day, I can't advise you guys not to buy something outright, because if you believe it to be a good purchasing decision for yourself, that's your own decision. But I can advise you to at least be careful about spending too much money on the cash shop, as the cash shop is designed to make people want to spend more and more money. Whether through items, experience tampering, and the like, if you're gonna play a buy-to-play MMO with a cash shop, be prepared to weigh the positives or negatives of that given cash shop. Can you buy power? Whether or not you can earn it or not in the game is irrelevant. If you can buy it, that changes the way that the market functions. That would make the game pay to win, at least in some fashion. The most cost-effective way to play seems to be to buy the game and spend as little on the cash shop as needed as possible, to get your conveniences like in Elder Scrolls Online or Black Desert Online. And when a new expansion comes out, like in the case of Elder Scrolls Online or Guild Wars 2, make that same assessment and see if it's worth the purchase. The next business model currently exerts the most influence on the MMORPG market, and might very well be the highest grossing style of business model ever, spanning more than just the MMORPG market. The free-to-play business model, or free-to-play, never has been there more a perplexing for the consumer business model, nor an overwhelmingly successful one for the developers or publishers. I did a video about microtransactions in the pay-to-win saga, and you can check that out here for more information on the free-to-play model and how microtransactions work and where they came from. It's no secret at this point that the free-to-play business model in the MMORPG space comes from Korea, the highest grossing country for MMORPGs, if those numbers I showed you earlier from Lineage and NCSoft's financials weren't enough to convince you. Free-to-play, or F2P, is a business model and term coined primarily with the smash Korean MMO hit MapleStory by creator Lee Seung-chan of the company Nexon. Lee designed the model in a previous, lesser-known title, Quiz, as a means of seeing if he could keep the dying game alive by making it free and allowing for the purchase of cosmetics on a cash store or shop. Soon after, all Nexon games were utilizing the same free-to-play models with more and more items on the cash shop. Nexon would go on to make hundreds of millions of dollars with MapleStory just a few years after its launch. Nexon would go on to influence many other Korean publishers and developers before coming to America in 2005 with their American subsidiary company, before being followed by NCSoft. But the free-to-play model had evolved. No longer was the cash shop just containing simple costumes and social items, though. Cash shop items became more bold, having items with stats on them, some even being best in slot. XP potions and a slew of convenience features meant that the original model of just buying stuff when you felt like it started to slowly become closer and closer because you needed it. The free-to-play model was especially attractive because many MMOs launching in the 2007 through 2011 period failed as subscription-based MMOs, but had new leases on life with the introduction of a new business model, the free-to-play business model. Titles like Lord of the Rings, City of Heroes, DC Universe, Age of Conan, and Rift all transitioned to being free-to-play MMOs in an attempt to keep their struggling audiences and finances afloat. All 5 expressed overwhelming success from doing such. Let's look at the pros and cons of the free-to-play business model. The pros are low initial investment, $0 or free, so it's accessible to try out before getting too invested. It's a really low barrier of entry. It can be a solid recovering business model for a failing subscription-based MMO or a buy-to-play MMO. It keeps otherwise dying games alive. It allows for players to juggle between MMOs because of the low cost investment. Free samples galore. Cost-benefit analysis, or fun measured in time per dollar spent, works out great for people unwilling to spend money upfront or potentially at all. It can be a good value for your dollar. Now, the cons of the free-to-play business model are, oftentimes it's littered with microtransactions based around progression in the game, XP boosts, labor points, and etc. The grind in free-to-play games is often there merely because they want you to opt out of it with dollars. Although the game is free to play, sometimes certain items or things purchasable in the cash shop can become required in the sense that it vastly improves convenience or viability in the game. That's the concept of pay to win. Even if you aren't the whale in a free-to-play game, spending all of the money, you still are negatively affected by that whale. Let's say you don't spend a dime, and that allows for such. You still have to oftentimes feel the brunt of the whale's pain through PvP, ease of their play, and their superior economic positions from the cash shop. Don't be fooled by the marketing. The name free-to-play might be a bit of an oxymoron. It's a business model that at its better end of the spectrum allows for free play of an MMO, and at its worst end of the spectrum can make a game unplayable unless you really fork over that cash required to compete. The problem there isn't that you ultimately have to fork it over, as some defenders of cash shops and pay-to-win seem to like to think. Companies must generate revenue to stay afloat, even in the case of a game that uses a free-to-play business model. Where the free-to-play business model becomes scary is when it's left unchecked and allowed to monetize more than just simple cosmetics and cash shop items. Tampering with experience generation, crafting bonuses and experience, and even items that can grant power can quickly turn the free-to-play business model from, sweet, I can check this game out for free, to writing check after check metaphorically, further contributing to the sunken cost fallacy. You think that you're getting a good deal, but they have designed the game around making you think that way, so you spend more and more money, and free-to-play games are psychologically addicting, as I asserted in my video on microtransactions and the free-to-play model. Most of my advice for the buy-to-play model applies here. Don't be fooled by the marketing again. An MMO is free to play as a model because it wants to make money, not because it wants to be free for everybody. Developers and publishers make money in free-to-play games, like the buy-to-play market learned, from convenience and XP tampering and cash shop items. And when somebody behind the scenes is able to design a game around aspects like that, you can't necessarily trust that they have your best interest as the consumer in mind. A free-to-play game can quickly become quite expensive. I have talked about this in my ArcAge and Rift Death of a Game. Although it might be free for you as a player to join in on the game, if everyone in the game has access to buying power from the shop, it effectively means that most people are going to be incentivized to buy that power, since acquiring more and more power is kind of the point of progressing in a MMO. So my biggest bit of advice for those interested in playing free-to-play games is be careful about falling into the trap of pay for convenience. It can quickly become a pay to progress, or even a pay to win situation quite quickly. RuneScape might easily have the best free-to-play business model I have personally seen, so if you're looking for some inspiration in that respect, go check out RuneScape Classic. I can't exactly come out and say that one particular model is the best, as I already started off with. Best is subjective, and it ultimately depends on the preference of the consumer or the player. What I want to leave you guys with, though, is a quick concept behind the word value. Value in a MMO sense, and in this particular sense, refers to how much enjoyment you get out of a game that you spend money on. If the formula for value equals money spent divided by time spent, then if you spend $200 and play for 40 hours, you have effectively spent $5 per hour spent. This makes your value number 5. This isn't a very good number because according to the study linked, the average American spends about 3.8% of their average income, equaling out to about $150, maybe $200 per month for well over 40 hours of enjoyment on average in 2019. Video games average a few dollars per hour of enjoyment, and it is of course dependent on the number of factors, but generally speaking, however, you pay about a max of $3 to $4 per hour of enjoyment. Just take this basic formula and use it for whatever current MMORPG you are playing. For example, in 1 month of playing WoW, I have played about 150 hours. And that same month, I only spent $15 for that month since WoW is a subscription game that doesn't cost a box price for classic WoW. That means that the value of value in this context is quite high, effectively meaning I am paying 10 cents per hour of play. This is well below the market standard. Now let's take the buy-to-play market as an example and say I decide to play Black Desert Online or Elder Scrolls Online for example purposes. I would buy the base game, which say runs me from 20 to 30 bucks. So if I buy the game and play for the same amount of time I have played WoW, I have actually increased my value by decreasing my initial cost. The problem is I haven't taken into consideration more spending I might have to do in such a game, especially if it's not immediately apparent to me. What if at worst you want to compete with other players in a buy-to-play game like Black Desert Online, and well, like this website suggests and the video I did on the game states, you might find yourself spending nearly $200 to get past the convenience problems initially. But once past them, unless you want to be competitive in the game with other players, ultimately you don't have to spend money on the cash sub, at least past a certain point. So eventually the buy-to-play model will catch up in value to a subscription MMO, and quite quickly even if you are a dedicated player. But if you don't have the time to grind or dedicate to getting past convenience problems in a buy-to-play or free-to-play game, your value shoots down tremendously. Because although in this example I have played WoW and BDO the same amount of time, in WoW I have no restrictions for my gameplay, and the economy in-game isn't affected by a cash shop. So in a sense, you are paying more in the long run for more content and the promise that they won't nickel and dime you with the subscription model. But if the subscription MMO, and there's barely any left at this point, doesn't warrant that monthly fee, you just don't buy or pay it. Just know that when you buy into a buy-to-play or free-to-play game, regardless if you personally spend a lot of money on the cash shop, someone out there is, and they are impacting the game because of it. Some games are more egregious than others. Maybe for example in the ARPG realm you have Path of Exile, which is a lot more fair as a free-to-play game. Because although it seems like I might be too anal about how business models function in MMOs, I'm only anal because I care about the value gained from such a game and its effect on the market as a whole. If we as MMO players don't want shitty business models, no matter the model, to exist, we need to be stringent in not supporting them and letting developers or publishers know things like pay to win and the ever push to pay to convenience are not wanted as the consumer. Unfortunately, they aren't only focused on what we want as a consumer, and that's why we have to be on our toes when it comes to shoddy business practices. Whichever MMO business model of the three you prefer, or whichever you think will be the future of the genre, let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you guys found it informative. Thank you.